So guys, a million years ago, I did a video showing you how to make the needles for an ancient fiber craft called Nålebinding. And it was a hoot. A lot of people actually really liked it, and there was always going to be a part 2 where my lovely wife teaches you how to nail bind, and this is that video. So if you're tuning into this and you haven't seen the first one, I'm going to put a link up in the corner of the video here so that you can go and watch the first one so you can make the needles, because they're hard to get nowadays. You can buy them, but the bought ones, I don't think the people who make those mass-produced ones actually try doing the craft. They don't work very well, so it's better to make your own stuff anyway. So make a set of needles, and then with that video, you pause this, go watch that one, and then come back and let's show you how to nail bind. So we won't do it in here. Dirty workshops are no place for fibercraft. So let's go into my wife's workshop, and she's going to teach you how to use them. Okay, let's head into her workshop. Dearest wife.
Oh, hello, lovely husband.
You want to talk about some nail binding?
Nail binding is my new favourite thing.
Yes. Alright, so you look like you've got a collection of stuff here.
I do.
What do people need? I mean, that we've just walked through how to make the needles, the special needles, which I see you've got there.
I do.
Yeah.
Lovely handmade needles.
What else are people going to need to be able to do nail binding?
So nail binding is one of those really cool fibre arts that you need very little for. The needles that you've hopefully already made are some sort of cutting device.
Yeah, we actually, if you listen to the ForgeCast podcast, which I co-host with my boy Sam Towns, we actually did a challenge on making a set of those. So they're a really good blacksmithing project.
And I got sent a beautiful set of Kumai ones from
Steve. Yeah.
Which are not in this room.
We'll swap them out partway through this video.
And also, depending on what you're doing, you may need some sort of tapestry needle for sewing panels together potentially, but you may not even need that. And of course, the wool. The wool.
All right, so why do we have different types of wool?
Okay, so nail binding requires a very specific type of wool to be most effective, and also to be the easiest to learn with. So first I'll go through what wool to stay away from if you're a complete beginner, especially if you're a real beginner to fiber arts.
Yeah.
And then I'll go through what wool you should be looking for. So
right,
nail binding is quite a wide weave. So yarn like baby yarn or fingering yarn is just going to be way too loose. It might be a look, but it's going to be very difficult to track where you're at. Stay away from really thin.
Okay. I noticed on this one you can kind of see the threads.
Yeah, so this is probably the most common type of wool that you'll find in your craft store. It's what most crocheters go for, what I use for amigurumi, but this is also way too thin for binding when you're starting.
Okay.
Stay away from this. Do not buy this. I know it's cheap. Once you know what you're doing, then you can go to it.
Okay. These look a bit thicker and fuzzier.
Yes. So my advice, until you can do this blind, stay away from anything hairy or fuzzy. It
kind of looks like a dressing gown.
Cut to me making a fuzzy jumper for a certain somebody, and it's insanity. Why you want to stay away from anything like this, including eyelash yarn, which is like the tassely looking one, is because you can't see your stitches. And when you're getting used to fiber arts, you need to be able to count your stitches and see where you're at. So stay away from those.
Which leaves us these,
okay,
which look very different.
So these are a lot thicker, as you can see, compared to the normal kind of yarn. They're a lot thicker.
Yeah, but you can still see the threads on that.
Yeah, so this one, it would be slightly less ideal. It is a plied yarn, so you can see that it's been twisted.
Okay.
But because it's as thick as it is, it will be okay. You'll be able to see your stitches. But this one is the one, ideally, if you can get your hands on, you want. And there's a couple of reasons for this.
Now, what's it called if people are looking for it in a shop?
This might be called one-ply roving hand-spun, depending on what country you're in. But what you're looking for, if you can see, is that it doesn't have the twisted threads. It's like...
just matted.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that like a hand-spun one is what works in this very old traditional thing where people would have had to hand spin everything back in a place where you didn't have wool shops?
Exactly. So why you want this one? Two big reasons. One is that it kind of sits as a whole. If you can see as I wrap it, you can really clearly see where each thread is.
Yeah, really clear lines.
Whereas this one can be slightly more confusing just because of the different
it butts together.
layers. Yeah. The other thing is Nålebinding is worked in lengths of wool, not like crochet or knitting where you just work off the ball. You actually have to pull it apart. So this stuff is easier to join. I'll show you how to do that a bit later.
Yeah, okay.
Cool.
Okay, so you mentioned that you work in lengths rather than off the ball. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so to get started, basically you want 2 to 4 meters worth of length of the yarn. If this is your first time Nålebinding, just start with a little bit shorter. It does mean that you're having to tie it off a little bit faster, but it will be less chance for knotting. So I generally just I measure my fingers to my shoulder 3 times, and I find that a really workable length. Just do 2 if you're new. And I nearly just did the wrong thing. There we go. And instead of cutting, what we're going to do is just pull.
Oh.
Did you get that?
No. Can you do it again? Can you give us another length? I'm too slow on the camera.
Sorry.
So pulling it out. 1, 2, 3. And you just wrap it around your fingers like that and then pull. Look at that.
Why we do this will become a little bit more evident later. Now, if you're using any of the other types of wool, you won't be able to just pull it like that. You'll actually have to cut it, but pulling this stuff is most ideal.
So if you're struggling to work out which wool to get, they're going to probably kick you out of the wool store because you'll be going from ball to ball, seeing if you can rip bits off of it.
Please don't pull bits off.
All right, so once we've got our lengths, what do we do?
Okay, so thread the needle. I'm using the bone needle. I personally prefer the way the yarn glides on it. The wood
it's
is
much more slick and smooth.
It is so much more. The wood is good, and even though this is finished expertly, it just doesn't feel quite as nice to move with it. So I'm going to use the bone.
Now, when it comes to, they're very different sizes, those 2 needles. How do you know which size wool, which size needle?
So the cool thing about Nålebinding compared to crochet and knitting is that the size and tension is actually done on your thumb. So when it comes to what size needle to use, it's really more what you find easiest.
So if you had
no right or wrong.
So if you had a big chunkier wool,
yeah.
You wouldn't benefit necessarily from having a big chunky needle.
Not necessarily. I'm going to teach you a basic stitch today, and I find this size needle is really ideal. For some of the more advanced stitches where there's more loops going onto it, then the longer needle can help. But really, the needle size, so long as you can get it through the hole,
yep,
that's all you need to worry about.
All right.
Cool. So we're actually going to get into it now. This is where the trickiness starts. Now, I want to preface all of this by saying Nålebinding is one of those things that only starts to look decent once you're a fair way into it. So I don't want you to look at what you've got on your hands and look behind and see a complete mess and go, I'm doing it wrong. It's just the way it looks at first.
Okay. Well, let's bring them in close and get those expert hands in focus. Okay, so everything's got to start somewhere. We've threaded our Nålebinding needle. And how much do you stick through the eye?
Just enough so that, just enough so that there's a length of tail, but then after the tail, you have a length of what we're going to call the working yarn.
But a length could be any length. So do we put through 6 inches or a foot?
Roughly double over a third, make it backtrack a third, roughly, of the total length.
Okay. So it would depend on how long your bit is.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong to that. You kind of move with it as it goes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so if you have crochet or knitting knowledge already, that might help you a little bit, but it's not at all necessary. It'll just help with the terminology that I'm going to be using. So the first thing we need to do is like a foundation row or a cast on, depending on what your background is.
It's like what kicks it off.
Exactly.
Gives it something to attach itself to.
Exactly. So it is the Nålebinding's version of a chain stitch. So you're going to take the end of your yarn with the end of the tail in your right hand, cross it underneath.
Is this the end that is through the eye or the long end?
The long end.
Okay.
So the working end of the yarn. So take the tail, goes underneath the long piece, and then through the hole.
Like
so
an
that's
overhand knot.
Just a normal knot, yeah. But it matters which direction it won't work if you put it over the top, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Has to be underneath. So making a knot like that and stick it on your thumb. And get used to sticking stuff on your thumb because that's where all of the action is going to be. So from there you can hold on to the end of the tail and the rest of this side is attached to your needle. So the first little bit to get started is probably the hardest bit of Nålebinding. So if this doesn't work out perfectly for you the first few tries, that's okay.
But if you can overcome this, you can Nålebind.
Exactly. So to start, the needle goes in underneath both the working yarn here and the loop that's on your thumb.
Okay.
From there, you twist it up and tuck it back under the knot. You probably need to see that again. I'll show you once more. So it goes underneath everything, twist up, and then back through. Okay, from there, pinch.
Pinch what?
Pinch everything on the needle.
Okay.
And slide your thumb out. And you should have a little X. Do you see the X there?
Yeah.
All right, that is the beginning of everything.
X marks the spot.
It does. I just want to show you once more because that moves really quick if you're not used to it at first, particularly the sliding. So we've gone in and around. Okay. From there, I just held everything solid on the needle and slid my thumb out. And if you rotate it slightly, there's your X.
There you go.
Okay, from there, you want to put your middle finger in between. If you look on the back, there's two loops just here. Middle finger in between and pinch your thumb over the X. From here, this is your working yarn. Lock that in. This is the terminology. Working yarn is the long bit. Goes over your thumb. So it kind of is sitting in the nook of your thumb there. From here, to pinch it in place, you're going to pull your yarn all the way through.
Ah, so this is why you can't work from a ball.
Yes.
Mm.
So you need access to the end. And make sure that that was the bit that was sitting in your thumb nook. Make sure that is just sitting over the top of your nail. Don't let go of what you had pinched.
Yeah,
do not let go because there is nothing holding this in place yet. So now we're going to begin the actual chain. This was just getting things started. Okay, so now we're just going to aim to get another row on the thumb just below it there. So make sure this working tail, I should say, should always be over your thumb nook. Keep it on that side. So if you look, I always think of this as Princess Leia buns. not the official terminology, but if you look, you can see one little loop here and one little loop here. She has buns. So you're going to pick up one bun and then pick up the other bun. So now both buns are on the needle. Go down underneath the loop that's already on your thumb and underneath your working yarn. Make sure your working yarn is over the needle here. It's not going to work if it's underneath like that. So make sure.
Well, both of those loops.
Over.
So it's 4 loops in general, and in total.
That's right. So keep pinched on the needle here. After this bit, it's about to get a lot easier. Okay, so bear with me here. So keep it pinched and we're going to slide it all the way through and pull all the way through. And that second loop is just going to sit just below that first one that we did. If it has wound up that it's up here or something like that, that's okay. Just slide it down. Just make it so that it's sitting below. Okay, now you can let go of things. So this is all knotted in.
Oh, it looks like fabric on the back.
It's nice. Now this is the bit where I'm saying don't look too closely at what's going on there, because it doesn't matter how skilled you are at nail binding. This is going to look messy. Just ignore. It will work out. Trust.
Trust the process.
Okay, so the most important thing that you need to identify here is if you trace the sides of your 2 little loops here around, you will find what was, there it is there. What was the first layer bun that we went through. If you can identify this one, that's all we need moving forward. So from here, things are about to get really straightforward. What you're going to do is do a chain for as long as you want your project to be. So if you're doing a scarf, you know, you might want it to be 8 inches wide or something like that. So however many of these you feel is appropriate, that's what we're going to do. But I'm going to make a little swatch of fabric for you so you can see. So we're going to first of all go up under the top loop and then through that layer bun that we had identified, and from there back underneath the loop that's still on your thumb and underneath the working yarn. Don't worry if that didn't make sense. We're about to do a bunch of these.
It actually looks like you kind of repeated the last step in a way. You've got the 4 loops total.
That is exactly the point. We're going to do this over and over and over and over. Okay, so just make sure that whenever you're pulling that loop through, that it comes and sits underneath the previous one. So the one that you're working on is on top, the one that you've just cast is on the bottom, and that always needs to be the case. So now if you look, there's a big loop standing right out there. That's your guy. So we're going to just keep going through the top and then through the last loop that we made and then underneath the whole working project. And I'll show you that again nice and slow. So underneath the top, through the loop that's standing up, twist, going underneath the loop that's on your thumb, underneath the working yarn, and pinch and pull through. Just be careful when you're pulling it through. Sometimes the tail wants to bunch up a bit. Don't just yank on it. You'll get knots. Not the good kind.
That's why you said to manage the lengths.
That's right.
Shorter lengths would have less chance of bunching up.
Shorter is going to be much easier to handle with. So again, once you've pulled it through, just make sure that that loop that you've just made is underneath. Okay, and rinse and repeat. So now you'll see there's a new loop right here. Now, when it comes to, I think the biggest pro tip to doing this as a beginner is make sure that your tension is consistent. It doesn't matter if it's really loose. It doesn't matter if it's really tight. And the way that you tension is pulling on this working yarn end here and go by the way it feels wrapped around your thumb, because you'll actually feel it pulling. So make that feeling the same every time. Okay, so that's our last loop there. And we're going to go up through the top one, through that last loop, twist, I always think of it as like, and dive, as we dive underneath them all, pull through. So the way that I'm handling this, I'm literally just pinching back here to keep everything in check, but not so tight that I can't pull the yarn through, of course, and make sure it goes on the bottom. Cool. So now if you haven't listened to what I've said and you have looked at your giant mass of knots, which is what nail binding is, a giant mass of knots, it is going to look like nothing at the moment, and that's totally normal. You haven't messed it up. It will look like nothing until we've done the next row.
Well, until we get to that point, you want to go back through getting to here again at a more reasonable speed, and then we'll see if people can follow along.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Okay, so I've got about 3 meters of length. Just want to go over this again. For you. So start with the tail, not the end that's through your needle, not the short end, but the long end.
And we do our overhand knot, but it's got to be under.
Yeah. Tail in your right hand and go under. And let's leave a little bit more of a tail than I did last time. It wasn't nice to myself. Overhand knot. And stick it on your thumb. Okay, so first thing, we're going to make layer buns.
Then you got to go under the side and the working end.
Yeah.
And then flip it over.
Twist and under.
And dive.
Again. We're not diving yet.
Okay.
We're making layer buns.
Then you've got the X. I see the X.
Okay.
So we've got to put our finger between the back of the X.
Middle finger between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Thumb on the X.
Mm-hmm.
Working yarn in the thumb nook.
Mm-hmm.
Pinch and slide through. Keep pinching. Don't let it move. If you let it move at this stage, you will have to start again. Because remember, nothing is solid at the moment. So I'm going to pull it through, and we have our first loop on the thumb.
Excellent.
So now we have our layer buns. You see?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So one bun there, one bun there. I'm going to go through the first bun, through the second bun.
So through the back of the second bun?
Yep.
So front of the first bun, back of the second bun.
Yeah. You can see that. That's what it should look like.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, pinch. Make sure your working yarn is in front of your thumb nook. So if you saw mine was behind like that, it's really simple. You just, move it over. Pinch, and we're pulling. Keep pinching. Don't stop pinching. And remember, this one needs to go below. And you can just fix it up if it didn't. If you lose track, by the way, just a pro tip, if they've landed on top of each other and you're just not sure which one you just did, give the working yarn a tug, and the last one that moves, that was your last one. So the one that moves should be on the bottom.
That's handy.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the loop that we're working with now. We don't need 2 layer buns anymore. That was just for the first anchoring stitch. We're just going to work on that one now. So,
under the top one.
Working yarn in the nook. So top one under.
Loop.
Grab that loop. Whoops. And we're going to twist and dive.
And dive.
We're diving. I go underneath the one that's on your thumb and the working yarn.
And then we're going to keep repeating this process.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a length, and then I'll be able to show you how to tie on your next piece of yarn, and also how to turn a corner and go back the other way to start making a flat panel.
5 minutes later.
Okay, so I've done a length of the chain stitch, and you can see that I have very little left on my needle.
So even though it started out with it being doubling back on itself by a third of the thing, does that get shorter over time?
Yes, because as you make each loop or each knot, you're using up a little bit more of the yarn.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So by the way, a null binding is great if you ever want to put it down. It's not like knitting where you need to be really careful, and if it slides off the hook, then everything's stuffed and you can literally slide your thumb out of the loops, and the last 2 loops are the ones that your thumb goes back into. So when you're ready to pick it up, and like I said before, if you do get confused which one's which, give the working yarn a tug and look and see which one pulls. Okay, so what you may have, it might look like mine, it might not look like mine. If you have a chain that doesn't have even stitches like this, it may be just that you didn't make sure that each loop felt the same around your thumb, so the same tightness, or you need to give it a stretch. So just give it a bit of a stretch, because these are knots, loops upon more knots and loops. You can't ruin it by giving it a little tug, and you might find that the stitches even out quite a bit just by doing that. Okay, but the next thing to do is to get more yarn, right? Okay, so we need to add more length on, and this is why I mentioned that we're working in lengths, not off the ball. While this may seem really annoying at first, I guarantee you it's actually not as annoying as it sounds. So the reason why we pulled the ends and didn't cut them is because we want this shagginess. The cool thing about this kind of roving wool is that you can essentially felt itself into itself, which means a completely seamless, knot-free join. So what
Not with a K.
Yes. So what you're going to do is take the end of the new yarn and just pull it apart like this a bit until it's a bit fluffy. Do the same with, this is the one that's on my actual work, and I'm just going to do the same. I'm just kind of teasing it apart to make it floof. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't need to be pretty. Okay. So then you're going to lie them on top of each other. So just the fuzzy ends overlapping like this. And we're going to rub vigorously in your hands. Now, if you have really dry hands or you live in a really dry environment, putting a little bit of water on your hands can help. I tend to have slightly moist hands. That sounds lovely, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I find that I don't need it. And you're just going to swizzle, swizzle, swizzle back and forth all the way up and down those tails.
That's amazing.
Can you see what's happening?
That is so cool.
Yep. So that's why this particular yarn is just perfect for null binding. As soon as you have knots in it, it's hard to get through the loops compared to knitting and crochet where you can just, knit or stitch over it. So that's why this is the best.
Just a quick aside before we get back to that video. Did you know I have a Patreon? I do. I know I always talk about it at the end of my videos, but before I did this and was making knives and blacksmithing full time, I used to actually coach businesses quite a bit, and my Patreon is all about that. Not only do I give you lots of sort of quick tips for your workshop and making things using tools and all that sort of pro tips for that, but I also, if in the higher tiers of the Patreon, will coach you to turn what you do, whatever your thing is that you do, into a viable business. That's what you get. You get me giving you business tips and advice, and you can call on me to get appraisals on what you're doing, give you planning advice and tips and things like that. So if you're thinking of getting serious about what you do, give my Patreon a look. Anyway, back to the video.
Okay, so we're back with our extra length attached. So what you'll have is your chain. You'll need to locate your thumb loops, of course, but what I just want to teach you really quickly is to how to count stitches, and this is very, very important in any fiber art, because you need to know that you're not accidentally increasing or decreasing, particularly if you're trying to make a scarf that is, straight. You don't want like wonky edges like this. So if you can see on your work, on one edge it kind of looks like a plait. You know, if you were to braid hair, if you can see that.
Oh, yeah.
And on the other edge, it looks like rope.
Oh, yes. Twisty.
You can see that?
Yep.
This is the edge we're going to be working on. And each one of these is a stitch. And that's why I say this yarn is so important to use when you're starting, because you can see it really clearly. You can imagine if there's layers or fuzz or anything else, it gets hard to differentiate. So if you want to count up your loops, you can. If you're actually making something, I would recommend counting even as you go. Otherwise, if you're just doing a little swatch to learn how to do this, we can just keep going. Okay, so let's identify thumb loops. So you're looking for the end that the, the working yarn's coming out of, and those two, they're always going to be bigger than the others. So you slip your thumb in there and pull to see which one is the last one that's moving, and I can see it's the one that's on the bottom, which is perfect. If not, just swap them over.
And so you've fed through like a third of the way again on the new bit?
Yep, just like when we started.
Cool.
Okay, so let's turn a corner. Now, if you're familiar, I can't speak on knitting because I'm not fluent.
So by turn a corner, you mean like going back on it?
Yes, because to create a flat panel, we work in zigzags like this.
Oh.
So to be able to turn the corner, it's a little bit different, and then we're going to be working down, so we need to include the work in the stitch. Otherwise, it won't be attached to itself.
Right. So it's not just doing a new line of stitches, it's doing a new line of stitches where each one is attached to the existing line.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So if you are familiar with crochet, this might make sense where you do a chain stitch to then turn the corner and do the next row. We're going to do something similar to that. If you don't crochet, forget it. Doesn't matter. I'm going to teach you anyway. Okay. So previously we were working like this, right? What you're going to do is pinch your work and turn it. So it almost creates a little, let's see if you can see, I'm going to pinch and almost cross it over on itself.
Mm-hmm.
You see that? And the purpose of that is just to bring that rope edge, okay, just to clarify, not the plait, the rope edge. I'm just bringing it so that it is
facing you.
Yeah, on top.
Right.
Because now we're going to work back this way. So once you've done that, if you can see, this is tricky to show you. You can see the two strands of the loops that are on my thumb. Can you see that?
Let's have a look.
Just there. So there's, I'll see if I can separate them. Difficult to do this through a viewfinder. So there's two there.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2. And then coming out of it, you can see the first kind of loop of the rope edge. Right? That one is going straight into my thumb loops. So it's the first one that we can see. Once again, this is why fuzzy wool is a nightmare. Okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to see anything.
Nothing at all. This just looks like a homogeneous piece like fuzz. Okay, so what we're going to do now is pick up that loop and the top loop. Whoops, just trying to work it up. On my thumb or on your thumb, and dive. So we're going underneath the loop that was already on the thumb, underneath the working yarn.
Making sure that your working yarn is in the nook of your thumb again.
Yes. So this is no different than the chain that we just did. Pull it all through. Oh, my yarn just came apart. Hang on a second. Technical difficulties. It would help if I was pulling on the right one, wouldn't it? There we go. Sorry, guys. That got a little wonky. Oh, it didn't pull apart. Never mind. Okay, so what we've just done, you can see the loop that was part of the rope edge that we just picked up, and it is now feeding into your thumb loop. So consider that, for my fellow crocheters out there, consider that your chain stitch. For everyone else who is learning nail binding as their first fiber art, what we're essentially doing is making one stitch. If you can imagine that we've gone along, we need to make one stitch that goes up before we can start going back. So it's like a step.
Oh yeah.
So
it is the U-bend of the...
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So now we're going to actually start moving forward. So we're going to pick up the exact same one that we just went through that is already on your thumb loop. So pick up just that one and then, whoops,
Top loop.
the top loop. There we go. And dive. Okay, so now we're going to start making progress. So you can see that loop that we've just gone through because it's feeding into your thumb loops.
It almost looks like it's untying itself from the rope.
It does, but it's not. So this time, to progress forward, we're going to pick up the next one, if you can see that. So that was the one that we went into, and that's the next one. It's essentially the next one that looks tied up properly. Yeah. So through that one, and the last one.
Right.
Then the thumb loop.
The top thumb loop.
Yep. And dive. So if you can notice, we went through 3 loops there. There was one to make progress, one that was the same one we went through last time, and then the top thumb loop.
I noticed when you take up the top thumb loop, you're careful to push the other side of it back so you're not just going through it again.
Yes, yeah, I actually slide it off my thumb.
Yeah, and then go over what's left of it, yeah. So
if you have a look, you can see the loops that were going through the thumb loops there, because they're the ones that look untied. There's literally a hole there. So we're looking for the first one that
is part of the rope.
Yep. And then just the last one that you went through, because if you can see, because we went through 2 last time, you can see them in order there. They're coming out of the thumb loops. You just want the last one, so the nearest one. They're next to each other. The first complete one, and then the last one we did. So there's 2 here. Up through the thumb.
And then you push it out of the way, and then dive.
I do. I never noticed I did that. There you go. I do. I hold it out of the way.
That's what I'm here for.
It just makes this pulling through process a little bit neater.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you can see the 2 that are in the thumb loop. They're the 2 that we did last time. Looking for the next intact one. Just the last one that we went through. And then the thumb. So if you think 1, 2, 3, dive, that's literally what I think when I'm doing it. I'll show you what I mean in real time. Oh, see how they crossed over? Just make sure I just run it through to make sure they're neat. So what I mean is we've got 1, 2, 3, dive. This is what goes on in my head while I'm nail binding. 1, 2, 3, dive. Or when you get more advanced stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, dive.
That's for later.
We're not doing that today. So we're going to just rinse and repeat all the way down. But what you'll start to see, I'm just going to slip this off, is this fabric starting to be made. This is not going to look like anything in particular until we've really finished the rows, but this is what I mean by nail binding gets better the more you do it. And it's not fair to look at it when you first start because it's always going to look a mess. So I'm going to finish this row and then you can see what the swatch looks like.
So grab the rope, go under the last stitch, grab the top loop, push it out of the way and dive.
I'm just trying to think about what I'm doing with that handling now that you've mentioned it. You know you do things without thinking. What am I doing?
It's just so that you don't go back through it again, I
Yeah,
imagine.
I've
'Cause
literally...
if you go back through it, it would be pointless.
So I think what I'm doing is I'm holding it down, if you can see that. This is just a handling thing, because if you're not holding it down, there's risk of it slipping off. Yeah. So I'm literally just pinching it down. Okay, so I finished 3 rows, and as you can see, the row that you've just done might have some little loopies here. That's totally normal. All you need to do is give it a stretch. Nail binding is super, super hardy. And you can see they're all in line.
Cool.
Awesome. So assuming this is a finished thing, there's a few things you can do. If you have a tail still on here and say you are making like a jumper, you can actually use this now to sew up the side seam. Or you can simply, whoops, where are we here? Find your last 2 loops. Pop it back just through your loop. And you can do any sort of fasten off that you feel like, any sort of knotting mechanism.
What if people have never done this before?
Generally speaking, so if you're hand sewing, for example, the needle goes through part of the fabric, wind the working end of the tail around the needle a couple of times, and pull through to secure
that ties a knot.
The knot. Yeah.
Cool.
Because nail binding is essentially a set of knots, it's very, very easy to secure. And from here, if you had a tail, you could weave in the ends just like any other sort of fiber art. So what I mean by that is if you find some loops here and you literally weave it through until you finish the end. So, a couple of interesting things to show you. Okay, so you may say, we didn't use this tapestry needle. This will only be if you were making something like a jumper and you need to sew up side seams. You can use the nail binding needle, but you can also use a tapestry needle. I generally prefer to use these if I'm sewing panels together, just because it's a little bit more precise and I can get in and make it really neat. So like I said, it's not super necessary for nail binding. It depends what you're making. But I did this cool little experiment. I took 4 meters of the same yarn and did a basic crochet stitch, a basic nail binding stitch, and an advanced nail binding stitch, just to see how far the yarn goes comparatively. I don't knit, so there's no knitting one. And also what the stitches look like. So this one here is a basic crochet stitch.
So that's what 4 meters gets you.
Yes. And all of these, by the way, are 10 stitches across, and then I just went as deep as I possibly could. So the downside to crochet and knitting is if something goes awry in the stitches, it will unravel itself. Definitely knitting more than crochet, but nail binding does not have that same problem because it's all knots. So this is much thinner wool than we just did in the tutorial, but this is the basic nail binding stitch that we just did. You can really see what different wool does to the look of it because it looks very different compared to what we just did, but it is the same stitch.
It's a much larger panel than the crochet one.
It is, and it's much hardier too. Much hardier. So it actually goes a little bit further than a basic crochet stitch. And this is an advanced stitch, which is a lot closer. You can see, I actually think this stitch is really good for extra warms, but you can see it's a lot closer together. It doesn't go as far.
Still nice and stretchy though.
Very, very, very stretchy. Which is cool because you think of stretch fabric as a fairly modern invention, but yet this was...
thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so legend has it that nail binding is superior. It's a superior weave or fibercraft because crocheted things, if you cut it or it gets a hole in it, it will unravel itself. Even if just a stitch falls apart or you miss a stitch in there, the whole thing will just unravel itself. So we've got these swatches and we thought, hey, let's actually test it out and see how well nail binding stands up versus crochet. We have no idea what's going to happen, but we're going to try it. And we've got some special shears here.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's Kumai from Steve at Alien Monkey Blacksmiths.
Yeah, Steve, if you're watching. I use these every day.
Every day.
Okay. I think I haven't been able to find anyone actually doing this. I think it's because nail binding... Oh, are you not filming? Or you are?
I'm looking. Yes.
Yes. Oh, edit. Okay, so I haven't actually found anyone doing this, and these are rumors. And I think the reason that it hasn't been done is because nail binding takes so gosh darn long to do. So I'm going to do 2 cuts. I'm going to cut just a stitch and then pull at it and see what happens. And then I'm going to actually cut an edge off.
All right, so remember, this is crochet.
This one's the crochet. Okay. Oh, I've never done this before. It's horrible. Ready?
Yep.
One
so it's
stitch.
simulating a hole.
Oh, immediately.
So it's already widening. It's getting worse.
It's done.
Oh, that's terrible. So your whole garment would start unraveling.
That was one tiny stitch.
One stitch.
And guys, knitting is so much worse than that. Look at that.
Look at that. So, yeah, like back in the day when people were depending on their garments, crochet would not handle it. Let's see. This is the stitch that you guys learned, nail binding stitch that you guys learned.
I'm a little dubious on this one just because it's a looser weave, but
Yeah.
let's see. Let's see.
We have no idea what's going to happen.
Wow. So it did unravel that one stitch.
But everything else around it is like,
Okay, let me
just get really rough with it.
Wow.
That is holding beautifully.
Oh my god.
Because remember, people used to make garments out of this before they had the ability to make fabric. This was fabric, so if you got a hole in it while farming or whatever, you couldn't afford to have your garment fall apart.
And as a seamstress, I can see that would be mendable.
Yeah.
I also have a feeling that
You could almost darn it.
I have a feeling that if there was a hole, if you tightened it, yeah.
Yeah, look at that. What about the fancy stitch, the advanced
Hang on.
stitch?
I just want to know what happens if you
Get a cut.
Oh my gosh, it's still together. Oh, it's a little bit worse, but that's impressive.
Compared to crochet, which there's nothing left of it. That was from one stitch.
And this crochet, I could literally unravel all of it back into a strand of yarn after that one cut.
Whereas this is still together, even though we've actually cut a slice and punctured a hole in it. And that is the basic stitch. So what's the advanced stitch do?
Okay, so I'm just going to pick a bit.
Oh no, my garment.
Wow. The
That's
rumors
even
are
better.
true.
The rumors are true.
So, okay, there's a hole, but like...
It's not getting any bigger.
I mean, how rough do you want to get with it?
Yeah, and mendable.
Very mendable.
So now you got a cut in it. Frayed a bit around the cut, but it's not spreading.
Yeah, because we're making knots, so...
And if you got to it quickly enough, you could probably mend that, to be honest.
I actually think I could mend that, yeah. At least enough, because it doesn't seem to be continuing to fray. I think you would have to deliberately undo it to undo it.
Yeah. That is impressive. You kind of think of ripstop fabric as being a very modern invention, but nail binding has been ripstop before it was cool. So there you go, guys. Nail binding from a beginner's perspective. Now, A lot of people messaged me because I took a while getting this video out after doing the video on how to make the needles. They were really excited for this video. So this only covered the basic stitch at the moment. It's about the sort of day one stuff. So have a practice with this, and do let us know if you actually really dig this and you'd like to learn like that more advanced stitch that she showed you. She's actually making me a jumper out of this at the moment.
In fuzzy wool. I'm insane.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And the rate I make videos, it'll probably be finished by the time that I actually do another video. But let us know if you want to see, if you dug this and you want to actually see a more advanced technique, and maybe even show how to sew panels together and things like that. Let us know. Put it down in the comments below. And yeah, we may just do it in like a year. No, it won't be as long as last time. So poor Nessa injured her elbow right after I did that video on how to make the needles, and so she wasn't able to do any fiber crafts. So pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Big thank you to Nessa for helping me with this video, because if it were up to me doing it, it would be terrible. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.